For everyone joining us, I am Carolyn Hymas, the Associate Director of Alumnics and Family Engagement. Thank you so much for joining us for our talk today, Fiscal Sponsorships for Artists, with our guest speaker, Robert Takahashi Crouch. He's a CalArts alumnix, as well as the Executive and Artistic Director of Fulcrum Arts. It's an organization that offers fiscal sponsorship as well as many other programs. Without further ado, I will go ahead and take myself off camera and pass it over to Robert to begin.
All right, well, thank you for inviting me. And thanks to everybody for attending. As Carolyn said, I'm a CalArts alum. I graduated in 1997 with an MFA from the Studio Art program. I have very fond memories of CalArts, and in many ways, my time at CalArts is what led me to the position I'm at now. And I think a lot of it has to do with, at least in the visual arts program, how artists work within and embody institutions and can produce institutional critique, can produce social engagement through these kind of structures. And so that in many ways is a kind of an ideal form of what we're trying to do with nonprofits and with Fulcrum Arts in general. So the way we're going to do this is, it's going to be a pretty standard PowerPoint presentation. It's very talky because a lot of what I'm going to talk about is going to be fairly technical, and it's going to touch on IRS guidelines, charitable trust law. But these are things that are important to understand if you're interested in pursuing fiscal sponsorship in support of your own artistic practices. So, the title of this is Fiscal Sponsorship, Making It Work for Artists. And that's probably going to be the last indication that this has anything to do with art for the next half an hour. The reason for that is because, fiscal sponsorship is a way for individuals and organizations to work within the nonprofit structure in order to produce work, create institutions and programs with some kind of public benefit. And that's going to require, to do it successfully, is going to require a fair amount of understanding of what that all means. So I may be saying some things to you that are might seem a little bit basic, but I don't want to go into this with the assumption that we all know what we're talking about. And I found, having worked at Fulcrum Arts and managing the fiscal sponsorship program since 2013, I'm pretty familiar with most people's basic understanding of what this stuff is. And so I kind of built this presentation based on that. So first, I want to talk a little bit about Fulcrum Arts, and here is our mission. It's that we champion creative and critical thinkers at the intersection of art and science to provoke positive social change and contribute to a more vibrant and inclusive community. We've identified two distinct programming tracks that best serve that mission. The first is our artistic programming that supports artist research and projects in collaboration with the sciences. So Fulcrum Arts, prior to being called Fulcrum Arts, we were actually a different organization called the Pasadena Arts Council. Being based in Pasadena, it gave us really unprecedented access to the sciences, and finding that these places like Caltech or NASA JPL or the Carnegie Observatories were very willing and enthusiastic collaborators and really opened their doors to us and allowed us to build programs like artist residencies, where we would have artists doing research residencies at Caltech. We even were able to bring in artists to the large telescopes in Chile for a week. as part of our residency program, in addition to doing other kinds of public programs and festivals that are all based around this intersection of art and science. So that's really fundamental to what we do, and that's a big part of our public face. However, Pasadena Arts Council, and by extension Fulcrum Arts, continues to provide this other host of services. And this is what's most germane to the conversation that we're going to have. We provide professional development, capacity building, and fiscal sponsorship for independent arts organizations that further cultural equity goals established with county and statewide support. And I'm going to unpack that for you a little bit. And I did some animation on this. I hope you enjoy. So first question is, what is fiscal sponsorship? So some of you might already know what that is or have a good understanding of that and are more interested in, well, how do I make the right decision? How do I select a fiscal sponsor? What should I expect when becoming fiscally sponsored? And we're going to get to that towards the second part of the presentation. But first, before we can talk about fiscal sponsorship, we need to ask ourselves, what is a nonprofit? And I went to CalArts, I got my MFA, and I remember I think I was interning at a nonprofit gallery to help install an installation. And a friend of mine comes to the show and she's like, I don't understand, what is a nonprofit? This is a very smart person, very accomplished artist. She's like, so that means they're not allowed to make money? And that's not the case at all. But I do want to make sure that you understand exactly what a nonprofit is in a way that's useful to you to understand how to approach fiscal sponsorship. So first, we're going to do some of the more technical stuff, and then we'll unpack that. So a nonprofit organization, also known as a non-business entity or not-for-profit organization or nonprofit institution, is a legal entity organized and operated for a collective, public, or social benefit, in contrast with an entity that operates as a business aiming to generate profit for its owners. So what does that mean? A nonprofit, let's say a business, let's say a restaurant, it's a pretty simple example. The restaurant does, at first glance appear to be providing some kind of public benefit. They feed people. But the primary purpose of the restaurant is actually not to feed people, it's to make money for the people who own the business. And how that's structured, say, different than say a soup kitchen or some other kind of public benefit, is that, at the end of the day, if there are profits, those profits go towards those individuals. The individuals who own the restaurant are going to financially benefit from the profit that is made through the restaurant. A nonprofit, and there are nonprofit restaurants. Let's look at Homeboy Industries, for example. At the end of the day, I believe it was founded by a Catholic priest. He's not pocketing the money that they've accumulated, the net profit at the end of the year. All of that money goes back into the program, it goes back into the organization so they can continue to provide these training programs for people from the neighborhood. There are many kinds of nonprofits. For the purposes of the arts, we're going to look at a specific designation called 501c3. So the IRS has a number of different 501c designations, depending on the kind of nonprofit activities or the kinds of activities that the nonprofit organization conducts. So 501c3s are organizations that are corporations, funds, or foundations that operate for religious, charitable, scientific, literary, or educational purposes. This includes cultural activities as well. So this is what basically every art museum, every performing arts venue, schools like CalArts are classified as 501c3 nonprofit organizations. The shorthand version, you could say nonprofits are organizations that exist to create a public benefit. And I'm going to say that a lot during this talk, and it's something that I really want everybody to think about when you're considering, is your practice something that you should approach through fiscal sponsorship with regards to funding and building a presence and institutionalizing what you do? Are you creating a public benefit? Or I should say, are you able to articulate what your public benefit is, depending on what your practice is? So what is meant by public benefit? An activity of a benevolent nature, having regard to the needs, interests, and well-being of the general public. This is why nonprofits enjoy some of the tax statuses that they do, meaning a nonprofit does not pay income tax. It's one of the great benefits of being a nonprofit. It's why you're able to receive funds from charitable sources. It's why people are able to take a tax benefit for giving your nonprofit money. It's because you're essentially doing something that the government could or should be doing for the community already. And so that can be, any number of activities, with regards to this conversation, think about an art museum, an arts program for kids, arts programs for adults, performing arts, etc. So at this point, that might be a response to what I'm saying, because I am speaking in very kind of specific, almost legal terms. And also, I hope you're a fan of the Doom Patrol, as I am. So let me just kind of go through a list again to kind of explain what are examples of organizations that exist to create a public benefit. We've got museums, art galleries, performing arts venues, schools, art service organizations. So an art service organization, Fulcrum Arts is considered an art service organization. If there are any dancers in this meeting, the Dance Resource Center is considered an art service organization, where what they do is not necessarily about the production of dance, but providing resources and support to those in the dance field, in the dance community. Artist residencies, that's also considered a public benefit. Film, television, and radio. Many of these things are publicly funded nonprofit organizations, like film, like PBS, KCET, television like that. Many films, documentary film projects would fall under this category, and many of them are funded through charitable means. Radio stations like, KPCC, KCRW, Dublab even, are all nonprofit organizations. So before we go any further, I also want to state that a lot of this language sounds very specific, but it's also all subject to interpretation, and so I really encourage you, when you're thinking about, and starting to reflect on, like, well, how does my idea for an arts project, how does it compare to these other examples? Is there a public benefit? You really want to go into this with a good faith effort. And I'm saying this not because, there's some boogeyman from the IRS that's going to, come looking to make sure that what you're doing is creating a public benefit, but these are the projects that would be most likely competitive for funding, or be most competitive for funding. So what is fiscal sponsorship? So fiscal sponsorship refers to the practice of nonprofit organizations offering their legal and tax-exempt status to individuals or organizations engaged in activities related to the sponsoring organization's mission. It allows the sponsored artist to raise charitable funds, meaning grants or donations, primarily for a specific purpose with a demonstrable public benefit. So what does that mean? So any nonprofit can be a fiscal sponsor. It doesn't mean that fiscal sponsorship is not it's something that's exclusively offered by organizations that do it as a regular service. So for example, Fulcrum Arts, we have a full fiscal sponsorship program. We have specific resources that we dedicate to the projects that we fiscally sponsor. We have a contract, we have a bookkeeper that handles that. We have, where those finances are audited. We have projects that are vetted by our attorney. There's a lot that we offer those projects. Now, some of you might have a relationship with a curator or a director of a small nonprofit in LA. I'll use the gallery Human Resources. They can also be a fiscal sponsor. They can also offer the opportunity for an artist to approach them with a project and saying, hey, I need to raise some money. Will you receive these funds on my behalf so we can receive charitable donations for this project? It's entirely possible to do so. Sometimes that's a really great opportunity. Other times it's not. It really depends on what it is that you're trying to do with your organization or with your project. So I'm going to kind of go through like, how does it work? So like I was saying, every fiscal sponsor is different, but they all share some common characteristics. That this allows the artist to raise funds through sources allowed by the sponsor, i.e. grants, individual donations, merchandise sales, ticket sales, etc. So what does that mean? So I would imagine many of you have researched grants for the arts, and you found that as an individual, you can't apply. This is because many foundations will only give donations to organizations that are nonprofits. This is across the board for almost all grants, and it's really unfortunate that there aren't more opportunities for individual artists to apply for funding in this country, but it's just unfortunately where we are. So the NEA, for example, doesn't give grants to individual artists. They did a long time ago, but they haven't done that for decades now. LA County or LA Department of Arts and Cultures doesn't give grants to individual artists as well. Most funders you're going to find don't. So then you're going to be left wondering, how can I get access to those funds? Fiscal sponsorship is one way to get access to those funds. So many of those organizations will let you apply through a fiscal sponsor for those funds. And that is the reason why 95% of artists decide to become fiscally sponsored. It's so they have access to those opportunities. Additionally, as an individual, anybody in your world can give you money if they like you, and say it's your parents or friends or colleagues who think you're an amazing artist and they just want to support you. That's great. There's nothing stopping anybody from doing that for you. However, you will find with individuals who are philanthropists, they understand the benefit of making a donation to a nonprofit because it rewards them with a moderate tax benefit. They get to pay a little bit less in their taxes if they make a donation to a nonprofit. So that is one way for you to receive, more donations or larger donations from an individual is by having a fiscal sponsor. Additionally, merchandise sales, ticket sales, etc., can also be run through a fiscal sponsor. We'll touch on this a little later, but you might be wondering, well, what's the benefit of me? So let's say you're a musician and you're selling CDs. What's the benefit of selling those to a fiscal sponsor? Well, one of the benefits is you're not paying any income tax off of any of the funds that you're raising. That's also, again, a big reason why many artists decide to become fiscally sponsored. It allows them to raise, if they're successful, a large amount of money, to be applied towards a project, towards, say, an arts organization they're running, without them having to worry about assuming such a tax liability for receiving funds. So this is really it. This is why you want to be fiscally sponsored. Another thing to note is the funds belong to the sponsor, not to you. Even though you're the one who did the grant application and it's your family that gave the money, or it's you did this massive Kickstarter campaign that you funneled the funds through your fiscal sponsor, those funds legally belong to the fiscal sponsor, and it's the fiscal sponsor's responsibility to make sure those funds are spent in accordance with your donors' wishes and what's allowed by the State Registry of Charitable Trusts and the IRS. Those are the two kind of like nonprofit cops that all nonprofits have to pay attention to, is what the state allows and what the federal government allows. And another thing is that those funds are called restricted funds. So let's say you become fiscally sponsored with Fulcrum Arts and you get $100,000. Now, we are the ones who legally owe those funds. We own those funds. Those funds belong to Fulcrum Arts. They show up on our 990s as income, but we are legally bound to only spend those funds on what the restriction is. Meaning if somebody, if a funder decided, I want to give $100,000 to, Joe Smith's project, then we are legally bound to only spend those funds on that project. And so I'm bringing up, I always like to bring up those last two bullet points together because it's really the crux of a system of checks and balances. So the nonprofit assumes the liability and the risk with those funds, and they assume ownership of funds that are raised on your behalf. But then you are essentially the person who has final say in how those funds are spent. So the risk of you raising a lot of money and suddenly your money disappearing because the fiscal sponsor decided to spend it on something else, like that would be illegal. And that would actually give you grounds for legal action. Not that it almost rarely ever comes to that with any fiscal sponsor, but it's something that's important to understand. And if you don't understand it, it can lead to some confusion and some tension. So it's really good to understand those things before you get into a relationship with a fiscal sponsor. Trust, and that's really what's at the core of this is a sense of mutual trust between the artist and the sponsor. So what else? What else do you need to know? So when you're looking for a sponsor, make sure you find one that suits your needs. And so I encourage everybody who's interested in fiscal sponsorship to go out and do a little research, but I'm going to tell you a few things that might help you with those decisions. There are what are called models of fiscal sponsorship. I think it's model A through G that classify what the relationship between the sponsored or individual organization and the sponsor is. The two most common types that you're going to want to consider are going to be model A or model C. And I'm not going to go into a breakdown of what that really means, but it's an important thing. It's just something that you're going to want to know. A model A fiscal sponsor is one where your project becomes part of the fiscal sponsor and you're actually considered an employee of the fiscal sponsor. There's an organization in LA called Community Partners, where that's how they conduct business. They interview you, they see that your project has potential, and you're essentially hired as an employee, and you enjoy all the protections of being an employee of Community Partners. You're still responsible for raising all of the funds, but you have at your disposal like an HR department, a legal department, payroll, and all of those things for essentially running a small business. So think of it like a business incubator. So a model C is one that's much more casual. It's considered a grantor-grantee relationship, and that's where the sponsor receives funds, they take their fee, and then they immediately turn around and give you the balance of the funds. So let's say you've raised $10,000, you're going with, let's say a sponsor that's a model C, and they take their percentage and then they just turn around and cut you a check. The problem with that is you're going to end up paying income tax if that's how the sponsor does business, meaning they don't really oversee your funds. They don't really manage those funds. They don't provide any accountability to the funder other than they can confirm that they gave you the money. So that's just something for you to consider as well. So when I say when looking for a sponsor, make sure to find one that suits your needs. those are going to be your primary considerations, is how are the funds going to be managed? Like, what is the relation, like, what's the story? Like, when funds are raised, how do those funds get processed? How does my project get compensated? How do you compensate yourself? Like, start asking those questions and learn about how a fiscal sponsor conducts business. Another thing is to look at the other projects that they sponsor. So for some of you who might be interested in getting a fiscal sponsor for one grant, and I will say an example of this would be the Mike Kelly Foundation. They issue project grants every year. They work with fiscal sponsors. So you might have an idea for an exhibition, and this would be a way for you to get funding to produce that exhibition. It's not about building a long-term relationship with a sponsor. It's really about, how can I get funding to do this one thing one time? And so that would be one example of working with an organization that isn't a fiscal sponsor, doesn't offer an ongoing fiscal sponsorship program, but they might be able to do that for you if you have that relationship with them. In the case of Fulcrum Arts, or places, as I've mentioned, like Fractured Atlas or Community Partners, you're going to want to take a look at the different kinds of projects that they sponsor. You're going to want to see, does this make sense? Does your project make sense when you're looking at the roster of 10, 20, 50, 100 different artist projects that they support? You know, are the projects at a similar scale? So let's say you have a project and you think, okay, my budget's going to be about $10,000, and you go to a fiscal sponsor's website and you see all the projects are all in the $100,000 to $250,000 range. That probably would not be a good fit. You know, conversely, if you have a project and you've got the fundraising chops and you can see a path to raising $250,000, you're not going to want to go with a fiscal sponsor that's only doing very small projects. It's just not a good fit culturally. And also, like, it might be that they're not set up to handle so much money on your behalf. So as I had said earlier, you know, does the sponsor administer funds on your behalf, you know, or are they just a pass-through? So many Model Cs, not all, but many of them do the pass-through. Get a check for $10,000, they'll take $1,000, cut you a check for $9,000, and at the end of the year, you get a 1099 for $9,000. Oftentimes, they don't tell you that's how it's going to work either. So you really want to understand how the funds are going to be managed. You know, with a Model A fiscal sponsor, they'll receive the funds, they will hold on to those funds until it's time to spend them. Those funds do not hit your personal bank account. You are not issued a 1099 because those funds are owned by the nonprofit. They are administering those funds on your behalf. You know, you as the project director are telling the fiscal sponsor how you want the funds to be spent, you know, who do you want to pay, etc. So, you know, that's a very, very real and very big distinction between, you know, how your funds can be managed by a fiscal sponsor. You know, and so I go back to that point where I said, you know, earlier, where, you know, the fiscal sponsor owns the funds, but those funds are restricted to your project. So in practice, what does that mean? You know, like, how are those funds administered? And that's really the big question to ask. You know, and also, what are the other benefits, you know, that your sponsor might offer? You know, some fiscal sponsors might offer you liability insurance, which is great. You know, some fiscal sponsors might offer workshops or other kinds of professional development opportunities. Those are all fantastic. As I said a few slides ago, the core service that they all offer is that administration of funds, is giving you the opportunity to raise funds, you know, through charitable means. The other things are just kind of like icing on the cake. The other thing you want to ask yourself is, what are the costs? Like, what is the fee structure? Typically, a fiscal sponsor will charge a percentage of all the funds that are raised through the program. So if you raise $100,000 and they charge you 7%, that's $7,000 that's going to come off the top of the funds that you raise. Sometimes that feels like that's a lot of money, but when you have an understanding of the layers of accountability that the sponsor is responsible for managing, it really just goes to pay off a part of their operating costs. Most fiscal sponsors have to also fundraise just to raise, just to be able to fund the staff. You want to know what the fee structure is, and I say fee structure and what are the costs because there are oftentimes additional expenses that you might not have been anticipating. Like we have a lot of projects that come to us and they love, like, wow, you're 7%. That's which is a very competitive rate for a fiscal sponsor. But there are other fees as well. Like we charge a modest $100 a year membership fee. But if you want to accept credit cards, there are unavoidable expenses like you have to pay a credit card processing fee, whether it's through PayPal or through Stripe or Square or some other merchant account. Those are fees that are going to add up. If you're receiving bank transfers, you might have to pay additional fees on top of that. There are some fiscal sponsors that might charge an additional monthly fee on top of the percentage that they're offering. And that might go towards some of the other benefits that you are receiving as a sponsored organization. So for example, we took on a project from another fiscal sponsor from another state, and the project director had said, oh, our last fiscal sponsor, we got liability insurance through the sponsor, so I didn't have to worry about that. And that's something that Fulcrum doesn't offer. But then I found out that they were being charged $1,500 a month for the liability insurance. So they weren't really getting liability insurance more than they were just actually paying above market rate for liability insurance. So these are things you're going to want to get a clear understanding of before you sign any contract with a fiscal sponsor. And the way to think of it is, you want to make sure that it's a good fit for what you need. And any good fiscal sponsor should approach it that way. Like, what's going to work for you? It's not in the interest of a fiscal sponsor to just sign you up and try and get some money out of your fundraising efforts. If it's not a good fit, nobody's going to win. The fiscal sponsor drains resources trying to get you to be a better fundraiser, and it's just not a good fit. You're finding that your expenses aren't being paid in a way that's useful to you. You're having a hard time getting financial information from your sponsor or what have you. So you want to make sure that the project you have in mind is in fact a good fit for that fiscal sponsor, and that fiscal sponsor services are going to help you. So the last set of questions I'm going to ask is, are you ready? What's the checklist? Aside from understanding what a public benefit is, do you have the capacity to fundraise? Like, let's be honest. If you've never fundraised before, let's say this might not be the best first step for you. If you don't know how to apply for grants, if you're painfully shy and you're not comfortable asking people for money, those realities of nonprofit fundraising apply to fiscal sponsorship, and it's not going to help you if you simply just do not have the capacity to fundraise. And I can tell you this as somebody who was fiscally sponsored prior to coming to Fulcrum Arts, and I just didn't have the time. Like, I just basically gave money to Fractured Owls to eat for a year for nothing because I just didn't have the time to fundraise. It felt good to have that relationship with a fiscal sponsor, like we're moving towards professionalism, but I didn't use it, and ultimately it didn't help me. Do you have an understanding of basic professional practices? And this is something that it's hard to quantify, but are you comfortable in a professional setting? Are you comfortable having meetings? Are you able to stick to appointments? Do you respond to emails in a timely fashion? Are you able to write clear and concise emails? Are you comfortable on the phone? These are all really simple questions, and I don't mean to sound condescending, but many of us go through arts training and we don't really come out of it with those skills. I mean, that's not specific to the arts, that's specific to anybody coming out of an undergraduate or graduate program. A lot of these basic things around professional etiquette are not taught, they're learned. They're learned by working a job. And if you don't have that experience, that's an additional hurdle that you're going to have to overcome, is how to begin to speak in that language of professionalism. And there's no right or wrong way to do that, but there are some fundamentals that you might want to get a grasp of first, or at least do some kind of personal inventory or assessment of your ability to conduct yourself professionally. Here's the big one. Does your project or organization have a demonstrable public benefit? So that's, I would imagine this might be a big part of the conversation when we have Q&A is, is what you're doing, does it have a public benefit? So I can give you a few examples. Are you wanting to get funding for your theater company? Just so that you can exist, pay the bills, and produce theater on a regular basis. I would say yes, that's a public benefit. I don't think we need to argue that the existence of art and the production of art I don't think we need to argue that that's a public benefit. However, are you able to clearly articulate who your audience is? Is your proposed theater company going to be serving particular demographics, particularly underserved demographics? Are you going to be embracing artists of color or queer artists or women? Or are you going to be building a program around education around those of those issues? Or are you going to be serving youth? Are you going to be serving a particular community that doesn't already have a good theater program? Those are much clearer ways to demonstrate your public benefit. And I say that because it's not that you would be obligated to do so, but it would make you right now much more competitive in the funding landscape. Are you comfortable with numbers, accounting, and math? Like, we're talking about fundraising. You have to be able to do basic things like do some basic calculations in Excel and do basic math. Doesn't mean you have to know them now, but you have to have the ability to teach yourself. Or are there people in the community that can help you? Or will your fiscal sponsor kind of sit down with you and show you how to create a budget on a spreadsheet? Are these things that you're comfortable doing, or do you freak out if you have to do that? And finally, it's like, do you have time? It's, again, I speak from experience. I had an organization, we became fiscally sponsored, and I didn't have the time to even think about fundraising. I kind of thought, well, if I get the sponsorship before approved, then I'll just do it. And that's actually not the case. Fulcrum Arts, we have a very robust and successful fiscal sponsorship program. I will say statistically, 30% of the projects that sign up with us never raise a penny. They don't really ask themselves these questions. They have a great idea for a project. They're going to do something really special with, music and music education, and they may fill one of these. They may be able to check one of these boxes, but they just don't have the time. And so, it just becomes a situation where people do a lot of work to become fiscally sponsored, only to never really use the program. So some things, believe me, I don't want to discourage anybody from considering being fiscally sponsored. I just want to prepare you so that when you make that decision and you're looking for a fiscal sponsor, that you know what you're getting into and you're ready to make it work. Fiscal sponsorship isn't a magic bullet. As I've said, just because you become fiscally sponsored doesn't mean money's going to just suddenly come to you. We've had projects that will become fiscally sponsored and they don't tell anybody they are, but they assume that people are going to somehow see the tiny bit on their website and just start giving them money. That's not how fundraising works. You also have to realize there's an estimated 1.5 million nonprofits in the US. That is how competitive the field is. Many funders require organizations who have completed 2 to 3 years of programming to be eligible to apply for funding. So California Arts Council is very generous. they have opened all of their grants programs so that fiscally sponsored projects can apply, but unless you have at least 2 years of public programming, you can't apply. So that's another thing to think about as well. Yes, you can become fiscally sponsored now, but if it's a brand new project, there's going to be a waiting period before you can go after some of the bigger grants. Doesn't stop you from doing any individual fundraising, but it is going to keep you from applying to those larger institutional grants. So now that I've gone through all of that, I want to walk you through a few projects that we fiscally sponsor that I just love and are doing great and are really fantastic examples of an artist building their practice in a way that provides a very clear and amazing public benefit. So this is People's Pottery Project. It's one of our newest projects and they're doing so well. They support, formerly incarcerated women, trans and non-binary individuals through paid job training, through ceramics. So the artist Molly Larkey opened up her ceramic studio to bring these women in and to actually hire them as employees so that they learn pottery, they learn ceramics, they sell these objects. You can buy one at West Elm now. They have contracts with West Elm, Erewhon. I think the LACMA store carries them as well. Each piece of pottery tells the story of the woman who made it. You can buy things from them on their website. And it's just an incredible, like, imagine if Homeboy Industries was doing ceramics, like this is that. They're going to be huge. And I'm just always excited to share this project with people. Here's another one, Bad West, run by filmmaker Joyce Guy. It's as I was saying, examples of organizations for the public benefit. This is an art service organization. It's a membership organization for Black documentary filmmakers based in the LA area and the West Coast. They do an annual festival. They have ongoing member workshops, networking events, and it's really supporting Black documentary filmmakers. They're absolutely wonderful. When Black horror started to get a lot of attention, they did a whole series on Black horror a couple of years ago during Halloween. I mean, they've just done some really amazing work, and it's a really great organization to be involved with. And then now we have Home LA, which some of you might know, particularly if you're in CalArts' dance program. It was started by a dancer, Rebecca Bruno. She was commissioning site-specific performances in people's homes, hence the name Home LA. She would sell tickets and raise funds to pay those artists to do those works, get in-kind donations from the homeowners. She eventually got funding to do or build the program to do projects in larger, more shall we say, more noteworthy homes, and ended up getting reviews in the Times. She handed the project over to a new project director, and they immediately got a nice giant Mike Kelly Foundation grant, and they're just doing ongoing programs with the box. But looking at this idea of home and what is home in LA, they're also talking about homelessness and working with organizations in Skid Row as well to develop programming. So, here's a program that really wanted to embrace a number of ways to think about domesticity and movement and art and what home is. And of course, they have to talk about like those who do not have a home and what does that mean for them as an institution. And then finally, at the beginning of the COVID lockdown, we brought on a project called the LA Art Workers Relief Fund, where some artists who worked in commercial galleries in Culver City realized all of their colleagues were getting laid off because of the pandemic. And they wanted to raise funds for all the art workers, meaning security guards, docents, preparators, people who are working the least glamorous, but the most essential jobs in the arts, people who are working at museums or galleries. It didn't matter. They raised money. They raised, actually they raised a little more than this. but they basically raised around $90,000 and distributed that amount in emergency grants to art workers. They did 2 rounds of funding for that. So I realize we are almost at 2 o'clock, so I want to now leave this up for questions. Here's our URL if you're interested in how Fulcrum Arts does fiscal sponsorship and if our program is right for you. You know, and I encourage you to kind of look and see, and if you're ready, and if my presentation didn't intimidate you, you know, we'd love to talk to you.
All right, everybody, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature and we'll be answering them from there. Okay, we got a question, you guys. Robert, do you want to read it out loud or do you want me to read it?
Yeah, this is really fascinating. Is there a good sort of Cliff's Notes resource for learning how to fundraise? Yes and no. You know, I would say in the arts, many of us learn through trial and error, and we learn through speaking to peers. And so the Cliff Notes would be for you to look towards those individuals in the community who are doing really good work and can, you know, maybe take the time to meet with you. And I say I will say this is better than just kind of looking online, because there's actually, this is going to sound really alarmist, but there's almost like a predatory industry of commercial organizations that prey on nonprofits. And so I would hate for you to actually like Google something and then some company consultant's going to come up saying, hey, we can help you fundraise, and it's just like garbage. Really what I've learned is those individuals who are doing the work are the ones you're going to want to talk to. You know, I would be wary of anybody saying that there's a Cliff's Notes resource, because it just doesn't really exist other than through the conversations you can have with peers in the field. So a good thing would be is there a fiscally sponsored project you admire, and talk to them and see how they did it.
That's a great answer. I just want to add that we have a workshop with another alumna later in the month. I think it's on November 17th, same time, 1 p.m. And it is on grant writing, and it's geared towards individuals versus nonprofits. And I specifically scheduled Robert's talk to come before so we could talk about the fiscal sponsorship part, and then we'll layer on the grant writing part as well. Also, in the alumni office, we kind of flip-flop back and forth with fundraising. So if you have any questions about fundraising from individuals, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to set aside, you know, 30 minutes or an hour of my time to talk to anybody about individual giving. Super happy to share that knowledge with anyone from what I've learned working at CalArts in the development office.
Yeah, so there's a question about asking about the process of fundraising after receiving fiscal sponsorship. So you could talk to Carolyn, who will walk you through that. But you know, it depends on the services the sponsor offers. So with Fulcrum, we would offer you the opportunity to sit down with us, you know, via Zoom, and to talk through what your needs are. And we would give you a roadmap based on what it is your needs are and what your resources are. Meaning, are you comfortable reaching out to individuals? Have you been around long enough to apply for institutional funding? And then we can help you with those. I will say, everybody here who's interested in raising money should do a little exercise and write down the list of everybody in your life that might be able to give you a little money, whether it's $5 or $5,000. Write them all down, and don't worry about how much you would ask them for. But if it's somebody that you could reach out to, not if you're comfortable asking, but just somebody that you can ask, you know, write their names down and then rank them. Like, just put in an amount that you think, I feel like this person can afford $1,000. And your reason is because they're your dad and you know that your dad makes a lot of money. So that's a good one. Or it could be, a friend that you've seen is a member of 3 different museums, and the average cost of a museum membership is $100. So you could ask them for $100. Write all that stuff down, total up how much money that is. And let's say it comes out to like $8,500, and then cut that down by 2/3. Because that's probably a likely outcome, that maybe 30% of the individuals you ask your first time out are going to give you that money. And that gives you a kind of a starting point. The percentage isn't accurate. You don't know exactly what someone's capacity is to give, but it gives you a place to start that's not based on just nothing. It's based on something, which is your personal knowledge of someone and a general, kind of a beginner's percentage of fundraising. There are a few myths around fundraising that I always have to smash for people. And first of all, fundraising is a science. Like, this stuff is at a certain point when you've raised money, the numbers come in. Like, you can start to build a campaign based on these percentages, and they're pretty reliable. Another thing that people assume, and we hear this all the time, is, well, they gave me money 6 months ago, so I don't want to ask them again. Statistically speaking, people who've already given you money are much more likely to give you again than someone who's never given you money. Like, I ran before LACE, before Fulcrum, I ran the membership program at MOCA, and a first-year member would likely renew at a very low rate, but once somebody was a member for 2 years, their renewal rate was like 80 to 90%. It's like, once somebody has a relationship with you, they're going to give you money and keep supporting you. And so these are just a few little things I just want to share with you, that for you to start thinking like, okay, this stuff is starting to make sense. I know people who are donors to museums. I know people who always make sure to pay, for dance performances. They always like to make donations to dance companies. This is something I'm comfortable figuring out. And knowing that these are the people that you could start going to.
Absolutely. That's great advice. And I would also say, start with the people who are closest to you and your project, because they will always be your strongest supporters and build out from there.
Absolutely.
It looks like that's actually all that we have for questions. So in closing, Robert, thank you so much again for sharing your knowledge with us. And thank you to everyone who watched and has stayed on to watch. Really appreciate all of you joining us too. And I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon, and take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye, everybody.